So essentially what we are looking for is this combination. We are looking for three things. One is the two pole stars. The second one is the 24-degree obliquity. And the third one, from this verse, it is telling us, what it is saying is, it says the peak of Hemanta Rutu. The peak of Hemanta, which means what? Approximately 1 month before 21st December in our times. Okay, it is saying the position of the earth was at the apopsis. That is what that verse is saying. And at the peak of Grishma, it was, the position of the earth was at periapsis, which was closest to the sun. Now let's go to the timing of it. If we have to bring those all three things together, that we have two stars, pole stars, one in the north, one in the south, the obliquity is equal to 24 degree, and the peak of Hemanta at the apopsis and peak of Grishma at the periapsis, down to the day, the 2-month season. So right in the middle, down to the day, the periapsis and apopsis location, the timing comes out is at 12,000 BCE. And now we have that Surya Siddhanta. So something, if we think one is impossible, like how come it's a 14,500 years? If you have this picture, you think, okay, that makes perfect sense. There's a civilization going on in all fronts, and things are being added, things are being modified, things are being updated. All right, namaskar to everyone. We are going to do a 3-talk session today. But don't be scared, we are going to limit it to 20 minutes each talk. So the first one on the ancient updates to Surya Siddhanta. And I put the photo there because my co-researcher there, Mrs. Bhatti, she is based in Gandhidham, Gujarat. And so this was a joint research project. By the way, what I'm presenting here is essentially the exact thing I presented at Oxford University at their conference. And so it will be interesting to see or compare their reaction versus your reaction at the end of this. All right, I'll come back to in a minute what that 580 CE is. But let's talk about what is Surya Siddhanta. How many of you have heard Surya Siddhanta, the word Surya Siddhanta before? Excellent, okay. It has 14 chapters and about 500 verses. It is much respected text on astronomy, the Indian text on astronomy, and respected around the world, okay. It is not a elementary book on astronomy. It is written in such a rich language that you are expected to be an expert astronomer to even understand what is written. Okay, it's not an introductory test. It is something like a pocket book with the formulas written, so to say. This one I'm quoting is from chapter 12. There are 14 chapters, as I said, and what it is saying, let's go to the translation. It says, thus everywhere on the terrestrial globe, our earth, people suppose their own place higher than that of others, of course, yet this globe is in space where there is no above and no below. Okay, so the golastasya qua urdhvam qua vapyadaha. Where is above, where is below, because it's a sphere. Okay, so think of a sphere, like did we know that? But I'll come back to 580 in a minute. So that is the sphere, that earth there. Now in geography we use what? Longitudes and latitudes. Okay, so think of a longitude. Where does the 0 longitude exist in today's time? Anyone knows the answer? Greenwich. Okay, so it goes to the Royal Observatory in London. The Greenwich is just outside London, and that's where it is 0. Okay, do you know how it went there? I don't want to go into the history, but when British was ruling, I mean, they are the lord of the world, so that's where it has to start, everything, right? But we'll come to that in a minute. Now, so that's our longitude, and then we have the latitudes. The equator is 0. And from equator, if you go all the way to the North Pole, that's 90. You go to the South Pole, that's 90. The earth is at the center. Now these longitudes and latitudes, I'm calling them terrestrial latitudes and longitudes. They are on the surface of the earth, right? We talk the Delhi as what, 77 north and so on. Now imagine, this is just an imagination, but imagine that grid on the surface of the earth and expand it all the way against the sky. And what you have got is a celestial longitude and celestial latitude, okay, the same definitions. Now in modern astronomy, we use the term declination and right ascension, okay, essentially for latitudes and longitudes. So remember the 90 degrees for the north celestial pole, the 90 degrees for the south celestial pole. So when I'm talking astronomy, not to confuse with the latitudes and longitudes on the earth, but I'm talking about the stars, okay. All right, so 580, I forgot to mention what the 580 is. Now when the Western civilization, they became aware of Surya Siddhanta, like most of the Indologists after 1700 or so, so they translated the text in a hurry, okay. But do you know what they all thought? And they claim, I mean Burgess, if you read the Burgess commentary, they said, okay, that's a 1500-year-old text, okay, and based on the limited evidence, they're actually right. The longitudes that I refer to, and then also the latitudes, right? So if you look at the longitudes of the nakshatras, now Indian system is what, 27 nakshatras, those are the stars in the sky, and Surya Siddhanta gives their specific position in the longitudes, celestial longitudes. If you take those positions and if you take the current longitude positions in today's time, and if you see what is the difference between the two, and if you do the calculation, astronomy calculation, it will take you to approximately 580 CE. So to that extent they were correct to think that the text is from about 580 CE or 1500 years old. I'll talk some interesting funny things and how they tried to put the Surya Siddhanta down based on that, okay, but let's move on. So 580 is the correct, okay, based on the longitude correction. If you go back, the Surya Siddhanta values take us to 580 CE, and therefore they said yes, it's a decent text, but it is only 1500 years old. If you go to Wikipedia, for example, or Google it, it will say Surya Siddhanta is from somewhere 500 BCE to 800 CE. That is based on this, okay. But what we thought is, let's explore the Surya Siddhanta. The context was my work on Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana. So I had looked at all the astronomy observations, more than or close to 600, and all of them, when you objectively test it in a scientific fashion, they lead you to a specific date like 13 millennium BCE. And not even a very generic number, a very specific year like 12,209 BC for the year of Ram Ravan Yuddha and so on. So we were looking at it, so that's fine. Valmiki Ramayana is telling me something, Mahabharata is telling me something. Now what does Surya Siddhanta has to say? Okay. Now anyone knows the original author of Surya Siddhanta? It's Mayasur. It's right at the beginning, it said it's a Mayasur, you know, Surya, sun, gave the knowledge to Mayasur, you know, in fact Surya's proxy came and gave the knowledge to Mayasur, you know, that's how the knowledge will come. So we started looking at exploring other references, and to our astonishment we found this one reference. Now remember, Surya Siddhanta has been translated, it's been commented upon many, and the commentaries are very interesting, but I'm going to walk you fast through it. What this says, let's go to the translation. Now watch the language. There are, at some point Surya Siddhanta is saying, there are two pole stars, one each near the northern celestial pole, that plus 90, one near the southern celestial point, minus 90. From equatorial location, think of as a Singapore for example, these stars are seen along the horizon. That makes sense, right? From there at the equator, you're going to see as if they're on the horizon. The pole stars are seen along the horizon, and you know, I'm just going to skip this. This is a north celestial point, this is south celestial point, 90 degrees. So what essentially Surya Siddhanta is saying is that there are two pole stars, okay, one in the north, one in the south. Now why this is a big deal? Before I get into this, another phenomenon that we all should be familiar, because I'm going to present Surya Siddhanta evidence, is this. There is something called apopsis and periapsis. See, the sun is at the center, earth is going around it, right? And you know, so seasons are happening, but there is something else. This orbit is not exactly circular. So what happens is, at some point apopsis, and think of it A as like away. Okay, apopsis, the point of apopsis is when earth is farthest from the sun as it goes around, and periapsis is when earth is closest to the sun. Okay, and this point also keeps on shifting. Just keep that in mind. Okay. All right, so we are going to use this model, the, you know, basically the logic of scientific discovery, explanation, prediction, testing, the triangle. We need to fill all these 5, otherwise the scientific objective testing is not complete. Okay, so looking at the evidence from Surya Siddhanta, I am going to present 3 pieces of evidence from the exactly same chapter. Now it doesn't need to be from the same chapter, it happens to be from the same chapter. The first one, all are from the chapter 12. The first one is 2 pole stars, the reference that I just showed you. Surya Siddhanta is saying there are 2 pole stars, one each near the north celestial point, another near the south celestial point. The second one is the Earth's obliquity. Everyone understands obliquity? It is the Earth's angle, we typically say 23 degree. But you know what? It's not exactly 23 degree always. Right now it is 23.4. But you know, it also goes through its node like this. And that node, one cycle takes 41,000 years. So it goes from like 22 point something down there all the way to 24 and slightly more. Right now it is 23.4. So that's the Earth's obliquity we are going to look at. And then just now what I mentioned, the points of periapsis and the points of apopsis. Okay, so we'll look at these 3. We will then do the calculations, simulations with the modern astronomy data, and then we'll draw our inference as to when this particular update might have happened in Surya Siddhanta. Okay. So the effect of the precession of the Earth's axis, if you have listened to my previous lectures, by this time you must be experts, but you know, besides the Earth is rotating around itself, everyone knows that. Then Earth is rotating around the Sun also, everyone knows that. And the Earth's axis, now I showed you how that node changes, but there is something else. The Earth's axis goes around like this, pointing at a different areas of the sky, and that one circle is completed and it takes 26,000 years. That's another phenomenon, not to confuse with this. Okay, it is this and it is this. So because of this precision of Earth's axis, what happens? The Earth is pointing, the Earth's axis is pointing somewhere different place in the sky, and if there is a bright star, we call that a pole star. Right now, if you look at it, and I'm going to show you both the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, or rather the polar region. Right now, in our times, 2000 CE, right, 2100 doesn't matter, plus minus 2000 years is just fine. That is our pole star. Anyone knows the name of the pole star? Dhruvatara. What is the modern astronomy English name? Polaris. That is the one that I circled, is our Polaris. Right now, if you look at it, there is no distinct bright star in the southern hemisphere. So we don't have a second pole star. And remember, we are talking about the 2 pole stars, not 2 pole stars in one place, one here and one here. Okay. Now, if we go backward, we can find possibly multiple pairs that sometime in the past we could have had, you know, one pole star here and one pole star on the south side. For example, I'm showing this is the time 2900 BCE. This one, anyone knows the name of the star? See, this is our Draco constellation or Shishumar. Okay, and that star that I have circled is Thuban, and our Indian literature is full of these references to Thuban, especially post Veda Shakha Pravachan times. You know, the Aranyakas and Brahmanas and Upanishad, not so much Upanishad, they are full of this, and even the astronomy text. So there is a bright star there in the south too, around 3000 BC. But you know, we can have many combinations. So for example, if you go further back all the way to say 12,000 BCE, we have the 2 brightest stars at the same time. They happen to be the pole stars. This one here is Abhijit, Brahma Rashi or Vega, and that one there, anyone wants to guess? Canopus or Agastya. That is the star of Agastya in the south. So if you go back to 12,000 BC, they were also the 2 bright pole stars in the thing. And of course, you can find additional combinations. But how do we select? How do we know that Surya Siddhanta is referring to which 2 pairs of the stars? You know, is it to 2900 BC, 12,000 BC, or any other time? So, well, that's when, you know, we need 2 points to define a line, we need 3 points to define a curve, we have got 3 points, okay? So let's see what happens. This is what I meant by the Earth's axis and its obliquity. Right now it's 23.4. Now, Surya Siddhanta has 2 references. I'm just going to go with one right now that comes from the same chapter, 12th chapter. And you don't have to read it, you can trust my translation and what it means. That's a agama, nobody disagrees on that one. It is saying it is 24 degree. Okay, it is 24 degree. Now those of you are not that familiar, they will say what's the big difference, 23.4 and 24, kind of close. Let me just take a quick digression and tell you how Burgess interpreted that. So they were thinking that Western Indologists who had access to Surya Siddhanta, so that time they knew, so they assumed 1500 year old text, and they could figure out mathematically, astronomically, what was the inclination, very close to that number, 23.4, maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 6. And Surya Siddhanta is saying 24. Surya Siddhanta has a chapter on how to make sophisticated instruments, astronomy instruments. So Burgess writes actually in a commentary to this verse. Okay, he says, look at these very, what is the word? I mean, primitive, foolish Hindu astronomers. Actually, the obliquity is 23.4 or 23.5, but they are calling it 24, and it's a huge error astronomically speaking. So then he goes and writes the next note. He says, therefore, the whole chapter and their all claims on these sophisticated instruments in Surya Siddhanta is nothing but a talk, and only the instruments on the paper. Otherwise, they would have found 24, I mean 23.4 or whatnot, because he's stuck that it is only 1500 years old. Okay, let's see what happens. So this one is 24. The obliquity, it says, is 24. There is another reference where it also says 24. And the other place it is given in such a way that it cannot be an approximation. The number system is such, I won't go into the details, but is such that if they wanted to say 24.1, they had an ability to do it with the tables of sines and cosines, which are in Surya Siddhanta, by the way. Okay, so 24, remember, 2 pole stars and 24 degree is our node. So the obliquity is 24. So now here is the catch, and therefore I just picked those 2 data points. It so happens that in 2900 BCE, but also 12,000 BCE, when we have 2 pole stars, but it so happened that in both times it was at 24, because remember, 24 is said like this. So it has gone here, so it was 24, went here and came back. So again, it's going to hit 24 twice, just in the close bracket. All right, how do we solve it? We have a third reference, and we didn't know that, by the way, that it will solve it. Same chapter, 12th chapter, Bhugoladhyay. Atyasannatayatena grishme tivra kararave deva bhage suranam tu hemante mandatanyatha. There is a manda motion and shigra motion. Those of you who are familiar might know it. So essentially what we are looking for is this combination. We are looking for 3 things. One is 2 pole stars. The second one is the 24 degree obliquity. And the third one, from this verse, it is telling us, what it is saying is, it says the peak of Hemanta Rutu. Before I go there, everyone familiar with the Indian seasons? Or a quick primer on this. So let's say we start with the 21st June. Okay, so 21st June, and after 2 months is a Varsha Rutu, then additional 2 months is a Sharad Rutu, then Hemanta Rutu. Now we got the winter solstice, 22nd December. Then we have a Shishir Rutu, Vasanta Rutu, Grishma Rutu. Okay, so it is referring to that Hemanta Rutu, the peak of Hemanta, which means what? Approximately 1 month before 21st December in our times. Okay, it is saying the position of the earth was at the apopsis. That is what that verse is saying. And at the peak of Grishma, it was, the position of the earth was at periapsis, which was closest to the sun. Okay, now before I show you that combination, let me show you something else and see how many of you can recognize this figure. That same verse, if shown in a different fashion, like another interpretation, not a different interpretation, different view of what that verse is essentially saying. Anyone with a somewhat astronomy or physics or modern physics background, does this figure remind you of something?
Copernicus has usually said the same thing.
Copernicus? Who? Atom? Okay, anyone else? He's close, but not right on the money. In fact, what you are saying here, anyone? No? It's a Kepler's law.
Kepler's law.
What you are saying is a Kepler's law. Okay, now let's go to the timing of it. If we have to bring all 3 things together, that we have two stars, pole stars, one in the north, one in the south. The obliquity is equal to 24 degree, and the peak of Hemanta at the apophysis and peak of Grishma at the periapsis down to the day. The 2-month season. So right in the middle, down to the day, the periapsis and apophysis location, the timing comes out is at 12,000 BCE. Now, plus minus 50 years, that doesn't change anything. And so naturally, as soon as you say something about astronomy, people immediately say, well, it's a repetitive phenomenon, so couldn't have it happen some other time? Of course. But you know what? If you, I just tested just to make myself confident. I went for like a 300,000 years, 3 lakh years. After that, actually, the whole nakshatra system disappears. We have a problem with our nakshatra system. And there's only one instance in, say, 100,000 years, 200,000 years, 300,000 years. That's what it is. Now, so that's just a summary of picture there. Now, what should come to your mind? So we looked at two references. One is, I said, the longitudes of nakshatras gave us 580 C from Surya Siddhanta. And the one I just mentioned, two pole stars, 12,000 BCE. As a skeptic, see the Sangshay has the skepticism of the buddhi, not of the mind, has a tremendous value because it refers to additional growth of knowledge. What could be your skepticism if you see this? What are some of the questions that you would have? How many of you are convinced, by the way, about the 12,000 BCE? Nobody? Stunned, like, let me digest that.
If this has been tested, that this triangulation, that means 3-point coincidence, hasn't happened for past 1 lakh years or 2 lakh years, then obviously it is right on the money.
Correct. Okay.
And then there is no room for further questioning.
Okay, but as a Samshaya, the doubt is one of the essential ingredients. What could be the something that you might say, well, okay, if this is the case, maybe I want to see this just to feel myself, yourself.
Any other star kind of doubt can be there.
Any other?
That means which stars were they pointing?
No, that doubt cannot be there because I showed you, because you can find multiple combinations, but then you also have to have a degree of 24 degree, and the apophysis periapsis just won't happen. So as far as the combination goes, it's one unique combination. But you might say, all right, so what is it? This is an update to Surya Siddhanta. This is an update to Surya Siddhanta, right? Because the two pole stars is not a constant phenomenon. Well, that's it. Don't you have any other additional updates?
If somebody wants to disprove it,
yeah,
they might say that there is another instance of some other verse in Surya Siddhanta,
yeah,
which points to something which couldn't happen in 12,000.
Correct. Then they have a very good point. Everyone understands what he's saying, which means they have to do the work. Okay. So, like, the Mandan and Khandan, right? So right. So they have
3 evidences. We'll have to look at all other evidences if they are there.
Right. But so what you find is, this is just our work, but there are other other Surya Siddhanta researchers who have found additional updates to the text. I'm going to quickly walk you through. This is we heard here DRDO and ISRO. This is Dr. Anil Narayanan. He was a former ISRO scientist, now in Washington DC. These papers are in the public domain. So what he looked at is the latitudes of the nakshatras. And it's a bit involved than the longitude, because longitude changes very fast. Latitudes of nakshatra is a bit more complex. He did a very brute force analysis, like use multiple factors, anything that can change, and he didn't know, he didn't have any expectation, there is no agenda. He said, let me see where it goes. That took him to 7500 BCE. So what I'm saying is the values of the latitudes of the nakshatra in Surya Siddhanta, when those values were calculated and assigned to it, when he went back, it took to 7500 BCE. That paper is out there. Okay. Then the equation of the sun. Now this is his original work in fine tuning, but John Playfair has done it as early as 1700. The paper exists. Dharampal's, Dharampal has copied that paper. The equation of the sun, the most accurate equation of the sun, like predicting the position of the sun. Okay, it was the Surya Siddhanta equation for the sun was most accurate in 5300 BCE. What John Playfair did is, like, his crude calculation came to 4300 BCE. Not that bad, not that different. It's 5300 BCE. There is a somewhat speculative another update is that obliquity of the Earth's axis around 2900 BCE. Remember, I said there is a second reference in the Surya Siddhanta that refers to 24, very, very accurate. That also happened in 2900 BC, but there is some other reason why that update happened besides the obliquity. And then my work on Mahabharata, those who have read that book or otherwise, there is another update. Now, Surya Siddhanta refers to removal of Abhijit. It's a very indirect reference based on their values, longitudes, what it is there. So Abhijit was removed. That's what Surya Siddhanta talks about. But it doesn't talk about when it was removed and why it was removed. Interestingly, we find that answer in Mahabharata. Now, Mahabharata is not saying it happened in their times. Mahabharata is referring to the past history about the star Vega and why Abhijit was removed from the list. And that takes us there are 8 different things in Mahabharata, particular verses, like 4 verses, and they all can be explained only if you assume 14,500, no other timing. So then suddenly it doesn't look very awkward, right? Just suddenly 2 updates. Actually, there are series of updates. And so the question remains, I mean, how many verses we looked at? Possibly out of 500, maybe 10 verses max. There are 480 verses out there, 90 verses out there. We just don't know what is hidden in those ones. So just putting that in the context, like, I call these foundations of Vedic civilization, time, as a kala. We have the Mahakala, like in the Ujjain, but then Khanda Kala. If you were to talk about the history in a mortal sense, we have to stop somewhere and, start somewhere. So going back all the way here, gray, this is not to the scale at all. So quickly, as a foundation, many of you have seen the other videos, like, now we have enough evidence to tell us that the Saraswati river started sometime around 90,000, 70,000 BC. That's when it started flowing. Okay, so that's not to say that there was no civilization before that, but any reference which refers to Saraswati more than likely is after this time. You understand what I'm saying? That doesn't mean there is no civilization. Now, what we know from geology data, hydrology data, is that Yamuna split from Saraswati around 50,000 BC. There is a very recent paper, 2018, that supports this conclusion and says possibly it happened after 50,000 and more than likely before 41,000. So it's all that additional research is just taking towards the same number. Then the end of Grand Saraswati happened around 22,000 BC. And then 13,000 BCE, the Shutudri started flowing westward instead of coming south and going to Saraswati. And then the Grand Sindhu, like, if you look at the Rigveda around that time, it's no longer Saraswati, the Grand River, but the Grand Sindhu. And by 2000 BCE, I'm being very conservative, the river Saraswati was no longer flowing. It can be actually 4,500 BCE, 3,000 BCE. I'm just taking, a very conservative number for this. Against this, I told you this Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana evidence puts it at 12,209. Mahabharata puts it at 5,561 BCE. Mrugendra Vinod and the Srijan Foundation again did his lectures. The epoch of Veda Shakha Pravachan. Okay, and so he talks more like a 3765 BCE. Just so that you know that I had given those numbers to him. I had given him the mean position, but I told him that actually it's a 3765, but it can go up to 5000 BCE, astronomically. It's a plus minus 1000 years, plus minus 2000. So it's very nicely fits into that post Mahabharata epoch of Veda Shakha Pravachan. And why I'm showing you this, again, the Rigveda, I'll go fast through this. The Rigveda, we definitely know the last part is with the time of Mahabharata, because Vyasa is editing it. That's how we have Shantanu and Devapi into Rigveda. When we go backwards, what we definitely know is that the oldest part goes beyond 20,000, going backwards. How far back, we don't know. We don't have evidence to nail it down. But 63742, at least the parts of those mandalas are definitely older than 22,000 BC. So that's the 24,000 BC. Now, why am I showing you this? So now this is from other sciences like the epics and Rigveda and hydrology and whatnot. And now we have that Surya Siddhanta. So something, if we think one is impossible, like how come it's a 14,500 years? If you have this picture, you think, okay, that makes perfect sense. There's a civilization going on in all fronts, and things are being added, things are being modified, things are being updated. Okay. quick my marketing slide, if you want to call it. Just the books, and so the challenge with my books was they were printed, and they're still printed by Amazon in the United States, so it cost a lot. They get shipped here and so on. So one young entrepreneur, he's doing this as a absolutely non-profit with spirit, one-man show, and so all the 3 books of mine are, I mean, the first 2 are already there. In fact, something amazing, like I forgot the dates, but Mahabharata came maybe 2 months ago or 3 months ago, something like this, the Indian edition, and the first print run is gone. Okay, now something very funny happened. I mean, I said, is this real or you're just telling me? This 12,209, he came out with the Indian edition 2 weeks ago, 26 January. I remember that's the day he gave the copy to Sri Sadguru in Hubli, the first copy. So 2 weeks, I mean, right now that's where we are right now, and that print run is gone. So if you have bought it, thank you so much. If you have not, then you have a reason to. And this 3rd book is not out yet. It should be, if everything goes well, it should be out by Monday, this coming Monday. And the pre-orders are just shy of 1,000. That's what he told me yesterday or day before, the pre-orders. Okay, all right. And that's, I think, the end of my first presentation. Thank you.